Hello and welcome to the Republic of Ireland Book Club. Our book today is Under the Lights and in the Dark, the Untold Stories of Women's Football. And I'm delighted to be chatting to Amber and Rianna about the book. Look, first of all, I have to say I loved it. I thought it was a really brilliant idea. And the one thing that stuck out for me with it was that I started to think about football in other countries. Like, usually I just think about the football that I can see, whether it's like your league, Amber, and I'm following them, or the league in America. But this one just gave us an insight, this book, into football all over the world. So many different countries like Russia, Serbia, in Africa, just everywhere. For you, Rianna, what was the story that caught you the most?
I think for me it would have been the story about Marta. Obviously everyone worldwide knows about Marta, knows what she's done for the women's game, but it talked about all the different struggles that she went through as a female professional in Brazil, and I suppose she was playing for the same club that Pele played for, that Neymar played for. And then in the story it talked about how the women's team got cut because they wanted to keep Neymar for an extra year, so they needed to up his wages to keep him in the league rather than going to Europe. And I think the fact that they can take a whole budget for a team to go on one player, but Neymar then helped them raise the funds to try and get the women's team back up and running. I suppose that shows a lot about the character of the Brazilian players and how he appreciated how good of a player Marta was, but also the women's game. And I think that was probably the biggest, because I suppose it's similar to the Irish team with the men's team helping us as of late to get equal pay, and I suppose it's something kind of similar in that aspect, but I suppose on a whole different kind of level.
Yeah, I find that one about Marta and Brazilian football fascinating as well, Amber. And one of the things, along with what Amber was saying, or what Rianna was saying about what happened with Los Santos, was there was some stats in the piece as well, and it was really interesting to see that Brazil, a country that you would associate with football so much, had so little in place for girls football that there was only 10, one journalist had suggested there was only 10 clubs really around the whole country for all the population for elite sport, for elite football for young girls, and also that only 1% of the playing population was for women and girls, which I thought was crazy when, again, just a perception you'd have that football would be for everyone in Brazil.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the main themes of the book, is that, or my impression going into it, you were starting stories and you're like, oh, this is going to be really interesting, see how it goes, and then you get a couple of pieces of information, you're just like, how is that going on, how is that the case? And I think, when you talk about football, Brazil is the first country pops into your head. They talked about happily spending 7, 8, 9 hours on a training field that wasn't a pitch at all, and you think when they were willing to do that, that's the reason they are so technically good, they're so skillful. And you look at Marta, her talent didn't just come out of the sky one day. It was those 8, 9 hours every single day in the rain, and then going home to look after family members that weren't able to do that. And I just think there's so many factors of it that I think for me it was eye-opening, because I didn't have any inkling about some of the stories that I read.
For you, Amber, then, what was the story that really stood out to you the most?
I think there was two. I think the story about the players that ended up playing in Russia, I think was, I don't really know if I have any words to describe what I read. I think if you had
you have to read it to believe it.
You have to read it to believe it. If someone had told me that story, you'd think, this person, what are they talking about? I think when she came back to America and she said, she got tested and there was 3 anabolic steroids found in her body from random injections given to her by the manager, who I don't think had any medical background at all. And I think that was, and the thing is about me, these stories came from 10, 15 years ago. It's not 30, 40 years ago where we're thinking time has moved on. But I think a lot of these stories are so close to heart and so close to the time. I think it's frustrating. And for me then, I think the biggest story that made an impression on me was one that I had already previous knowledge about, was about Nadia Nadim. I think the reason it's so relevant is because what's going on in Afghanistan at the minute with the Taliban, and her literally leaving that country, having no idea where she's going to ends up in Denmark, and arguably becomes one of the best female Danish players, female world players. And she came from that. She came from, her father was murdered by the Taliban, and then it's like, how does somebody like that, coming from that story, end up then on the world stage? And unfortunately this week there was the news that she had just tore her ACL. So obviously you hope that she's going to make it back for the Euros next year, because playing against her, you can see, it's the determination. And I think there's a quote at the end when they talk about the mothers and the players. They call it the "I'll show you" mentality, and I think that was so present throughout the book.
Definitely, and as well, I think that a theme that was really running through it, Rianna, was just the love that these women have for the game, because there was so many challenges that they had to overcome, and I'm not talking about a challenge, well, one that you faced recently, which was a fight for equal pay. We're talking about challenges like travelling for hours to try and get to play a game so that you can earn some money to feed your family and to build a house. Like as you were saying there about Nadia having to escape her country and then just finding so much solace in football, because she was able to block out, when she was playing, she was able to block out what had happened to her father at home when he'd been murdered by the Taliban. And all that got them through these really tough experiences was their love of football, Rianna, and that chance to go and play and switch off and kick a ball around and just have a bit of innocent time to themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the crazy part about it, because we'll always talk about like how much we love the game, and that's why we're still in it. And obviously you see young girls in Ireland especially drop off between the ages of like 14 and 16, 17, but obviously we love the game and that's why we're still in it. But these girls, it was like they either play football, follow what they love and earn money, or else they're stuck in a country where there's nothing for them, where there's nothing for women other than rearing a family. Kind of the men kind of put the food on the table, and some of these women, these girls, when they leave their countries, they go to new countries where they don't speak the language, they don't know anybody, there's no communication home bar maybe a phone call, but they're earning buttons, so the money that they're earning isn't massive amounts of money, but still they put the majority of that money away and send it home to their family to look after their brothers, their sisters, their parents back home. And I think that's probably the craziest thing about it. There was an African player, and she was saying that her dad was disappointed when she was born because they expected her to be a boy, and for him it was kind of like embarrassing that he only produced girls, and he didn't want her to play football, didn't want her to do anything like that. But she stuck to her guns. She went out and played on the street. She travelled hours to go and train, and then eventually when she got that professional contract, she was sending so much money home that she was able to buy some land. I think when her father passed away suddenly, she felt guilty because she always like pestered him when she was younger, asking, why can't we do this, why can't we have that? And when he passed away, she was saying that it was like the stress of how do I feed my family, how do I put clothes on the kids' back. And when that happened, it was all on her then, because her father's side of the family had disowned them because her father didn't have a boy, and it was an embarrassment. So she was sending as much money home as possible to buy her mom some land so that her family were looked after. And I suppose it's those crazy little things where we're talking about, we play football, we earn money for us. Like, we don't have the fear of having to send money home to our families too.
And she was earning like €70 a week and sending back what she could out of that, which for me, I thought, how is she surviving?
Yeah, it's crazy, because obviously in the women's game, they talk about like there's nowhere near as much money as there is in the men game. Like even in the US, when the league kind of reformed for the third time, you're looking at like the figures for the minimum wage, and it is literally minimum wage, where you're talking about players like living with host families, living in their basements, like the host families feeding them. And that was just because they wanted to play the game, and not because they wanted to make huge masses of money. Obviously you look at them now, different stars in the US national team, and their central contracts is different, but in the league to this date, there's still players that if they're not on those central contracts from the US, then they are earning buttons. And that's massive to think of one of the biggest leagues in the world, and it's still at that standard. It's crazy.
It wasn't all bad though. Like there was some horror stories, but like one thing that I loved about it was, like, one thing you mentioned there, Rianna, was that the sexism, and a lot of that is rooted in the different cultures that we did get a bit of an insight into it. But I loved the fact that as the girls became more successful, that seemed to dissipate, and instead of putting the girls and women into boxes and, you know, you shouldn't be playing football, you should be doing this or that, the girls that were going on to play for their country and being on television all of a sudden were becoming heroes, and they were earning respect. And, you know, even just seeing families reading about the families crouching around televisions in like the one television in a whole village just to watch the girl that had grown up there playing football, how the mindsets had evolved, because they actually got to see what the girls were capable of and what they were doing. And that's something that a lot of people, they don't get to see how successful and athletic and skillful girls can be on the football pitch. They just have a perception of what that girl should be in the context of the culture that they're in. So I loved seeing and reading about that evolution, and also even just the respect that they got along the way. And I guess one was Ali Long, and the fact that when she started going to these underground games that she went to in New York, and she was trying to get a game, and they were looking at her, this blonde girl coming up, and she was slight and she wouldn't be able for it. And by the end of it, Amber, when she was made the national team, like there was people adult men, hairy, from different countries, real gruff and rough, who had maybe looked down their nose at her a little bit. She became a hero for them, which was brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it's because they all actually saw what she was willing to do 5, 6, 7 nights a week on top of the training she was doing during the day, the travel she was making just to make this impression to get into the women's national team. And I think, we, as we always talk about, we all have made sacrifices throughout but for her to go and do this in, men only futsal tournaments, just to do this, just to literally better herself. She knew playing against men, and like we all know, playing against boys and men will always better us because it's higher, faster, and it's just you look at this Ali Long, who is now a world-renowned figure in women's football, and you're like, this is what she had to do to get to where she was. But just when you were talking about that, like how these women then become, they go from nearly, you see the grind, and then you see where they end up, and then you see this fan base that follows them that never believed in them. For me, I thought the Farrah Williams story was absolutely brilliant. Like this homeless shelter, this girl who Farrah just took a liking to in the homeless shelter and said, I believe in you, I think you could help me with the coaching and different things. And then suddenly she travels and she goes to watch Farrah Williams watching her on the TV. I think she was in Thailand at the time, sitting in a bar watching Farrah Williams at the 2015 World Cup, and she's like, that's my coach. And you're just thinking, how do you end up from being on the streets in Liverpool? She had said her family had been heavily involved with drugs, she was involved with drugs, and then you see this and you're like I don't think Farrah Williams will ever really comprehend the difference she's made in that girl's life. The same as the way you meet people in different walks of life and you never actually know the impression you have on them. And it's the same with, Ali Long's story. It's nearly like those people that sat and watched her day in, day out. They're like, yeah, she made it because she was willing to do more than everyone else. And I think those stories are, for me, they're the most enjoyable because, as you said, it's not just all doom and gloom. There's a positive light at it as well.
I think there was similar with some of the stories of like the French national team players, how like someone from a small town, the same as Zidane, and then there's that bond of, yes, you're a young girl and you're looking up to football players, but he took his time to like bring her under his wing and like talk to her, and they were bonding over similar stories from being from similar neighborhoods and just like having the same struggles, and then like return into those communities and being like a hero. It's like one person can change like your whole outlook and what you believe in and how far you think you can get. And it's like obviously different stories, like Farrah Williams working and helping out in a homeless shelter, to Zidane and Lilian Thuram like talking to not just boys from like around France but girls as well, and inspiring them. And now I suppose the beauty of the women's game is that young boys and girls now have women sports stars that they can look up to and they can aspire to be like. And I think the more that continues, the better for the game and for the younger generation.
I think as well it probably showed the commercial struggles that women's sport faces, and women's football, when you do think of global sports, it's played by so many people and you would think that it's something that can be sustainable, but we saw from the book that it isn't. And Martha's story is one. 7 out of the 8 clubs that she played for ended up folding after she left. But the fact as well that the Women's National League in America folded twice before its current, it set up the way it is now. So many women players, so many women were affected by that league folding those 2 times. And I actually found that quite sad, Amber, because, these women had dreams. They had gone to college and they were being drafted and they wanted to play in a professional era where they could achieve success, but that was taken away from them because of commercial circumstances and people who didn't have the best interests of women's football at heart as well. So it's really precarious all the time.
And I think it was Jessie McDonald's story, after she had her son, that, and it's, this is obviously Diane and Denise's teammate in the United States, that you're reading about this, that every year she played she was drafted and she was top scorer in the team every year, and she was drafted. And I'm sitting there going, if I'm top scorer in the team and I'm getting drafted, there's a problem. There's a huge, unless you're bringing in someone else who's going to score more than me, there's a big problem. But they were doing it because of salary caps every year, and they were like, okay, maybe if we get rid of Jessie, then we'll be able to bring in 2 players for her salary. And you're just sitting there and you're going, how, you know, for the team's outlook, for their future, for their development, the fact that they were willing every year to get rid of their top scorer, for me, was just like, just baffling in so many ways. And you know, even the irony of it, as you said, you know, women have so many dreams. They go to college and they put their whole life into it. And even for them trying to settle somewhere, for their husbands to get a job, they had 1 year and then it was like, oh, you're gone. So they had to go and find another job and another job and another job. And some they were saying that some of the apartment complexes were players only, so no spouses were allowed. And she actually had to go to the board and say, I need to bring my son with me to my apartment. And you're sitting there going, how are these things even comprehensible factors? Like, they're not. Like, you have an apartment, you can have 20 people in it if you want to have 20 people in it. You're paid to play, but you're also to be looked after in the right way. And I think that's one thing for me is such a huge thing. It's like, men don't really, you know, yes, they're able to support their families, but they don't understand, like, a woman has so many choices to make with her football. How long can I play? Do I want to have children? How long do I put it off? You know, should I do it now and come back? And like the most of the players that we read about, they had their children and came back, and actually they came back in better shape, fitter, faster. And you're sitting there going, how is that a thing? But that's where the article came up, where I think it was some psychologist had made a point that it wasn't actually a biological thing. It was the I'll show them mentality. And I thought that was just like, I just loved it. Absolutely brilliant. Like,
yeah, it was great to read that. And it was also great to read about the Portland Thorns, I thought, because it just showed what a team can become if it has the belief of the supporters as well, and the fact as well that they went behind the scenes and they met the people who wanted to drive the club forward. They wanted them to have an identity like the men's team, who were really successful, that the people in Portland could buy into. They had the players, they had the right owner, and they were able to create a culture and an identity and just a team that everybody wants a little part of. And the way that it was outlined and the fact that the author got behind the scenes and met the people that had driven this, it just shows as well that it can be done.
I think that's the biggest thing in any sporting industry and in any business, because a lot of sports teams are run as businesses. I think if you have the right people in the right places, then that's the only way that you're going to get growth. You're going to be able to grow your brand as such, because as long as you have the right people that are looking to get the right investors, are looking to get the right people in for the benefit of not only the team but like a whole community, because a team isn't just the players, just the staff that are working there. The bigger that you can get the community base, the stronger you're going to have, because you're going to have more people like rooting for it, pulling it in the right direction.
Yeah.
And it's all, as long as everyone has the same belief and they want the same thing for that team, is the only way that you're going to get growth. And I think that it was massive to see that, because obviously Amber has touched on everything that's gone on in the NWSL over the years, like the fact that the USA have been the top women's team in the world for so long, yet you hear these stories. It's just crazy. It's like the uncertainty. It's like they had a system that they thought was flawless, and then the league folds twice. I think in high school they have everything they need. Colleges, they have everything they need. So obviously there's the rules that the women's team get the same as the men's team. But yet when it goes to that professional level, they lost out on so many players, lost out on so many opportunities for so many years, because the system that was supposed to be flawless had failed them, had buckled. And I suppose because the US is so big, that you're then looking to smaller countries for like lesser opportunities. But the fact that obviously the NWSL is starting to grow, obviously the US have come out saying that the US women's team are now going to be paid the same as the men's team, and I think that's in favour for continuing to grow the game. The game.
Definitely. And another thing as well was that when people get to see the game, like we were talking a little bit about earlier on about the importance of the Women's National League here. The game's going to be shown on television, but it was a theme throughout the book that when countries got to see their national team playing on the television, that the interest just skyrocketed. The numbers started to grow in attendances. I think it was in Cameroon, they had 40,000 in a stadium watching the women's national team. So it just reinforces the fact, Amber, as well, that if you can't see it, you can't be it. If people cannot see the product, they are not going to be interested in it.
And I think it's down to the fact that, you know, when they begin the journey, and as they said, even about Marta, like when she was making her early performances, there was like, they said not many people were there to see it, not many people, and they kept going on, and like she was scoring an outrageous amount of goals. I think in her first 101 caps, she had 106 goals for Brazil, and they were like, a lot of people haven't seen it. But then I think they went to was it a Copa America final, I think was their club team, and there were 17,000 in the stadium, and they were saying that the majority of them were there to see her. And it just nearly starts off at that. It's like, oh, she actually is good. Oh, she's actually very good. And it's like, here, you need to come along with me. You need to see her live. Like, and I think that's how it starts. And you think about it, you know, when we bring it home to Ireland, like when you think about it, like 10, 15 years ago, like in the GAA, in the women's finals, like and even with the National League, like we started off like every year it's got better and better, because as you said, more people see it. It's like, lads, that was actually a really, really good game. And there was actually something that happened there a couple of weeks ago when Meath won the All-Ireland. And one of I thought was an absolutely brilliant picture. There was a picture, I think it went into the Irish Independent or one of them, but it was a picture of Hill 16, and there was a group of lads with their phones out taking pictures of these girls on the pitch. And I'm sitting there going, like, people don't understand how monumental that is, because these fellas they were like, this is class. Like, and yes, like the thing is, you can make a day out of it, like make it like as you're going to a men's game, you can make something out of the day. But I just thought that was absolutely brilliant to see that, and you can just see the interest has grown, and then you're like, yeah, these girls are great, they work hard, and look at them, they get rewarded for what they do. And I just think it's little things like that. And of course we had the 20 by 20 that you can't see it, you can't be it. And it's so real, and you actually have to be able to actually stand in the moment and see it to understand, you know, how important it is. Like, and I think, you know, when I was reading the book and I thought back to when we played Denmark, and then when you're looking at Nadia and Nadim and you're like, you're standing on the same pitch as this girl, and your journeys are so different, and you end up in the most bizarre places. Like, and you think about it, like, if you have conversations with girls at your club, or you always find you'll end up on this rant, you'll get somebody who knows somebody who's been on this bizarre journey, and then you see where they end up, and then you stand beside them or you sit beside them, and you're like, how did we all end up in this one place? And I think that's, you know, it all starts from that, and I think that's the most important thing. And you just really hope that things are just going to get better and better, because when you give, you know, when you give young girls and when you give women the right support and, you know, the right backing, you can see what they can do. And I think that has to be the bare minimum now.
Yeah, and I love that you can see what they can do, because one of the reasons that I love watching sport is because I get to know the characters and I get to know the personalities, and I want to see them the next week, and I want to see, you know, if they're going to score again, or if they're going to, you know, make great saves, and I want to hear the interviews afterwards, and I just want to get to know the people that I'm watching. I want to get invested in what they're doing, and if I can't see them, that opportunity is gone. And that's how you get the fans, is by just letting them get to know you, see what you can do, and then enjoy the football and the sport and everything that you're playing as well. But I think these books, like these kind of things, help as well, Rianna, like just having these different ways of reading about women's sport, learning about women's sport. Like, you know, we three of us remarked when we met in this room about the early 1900s and how there was 40 teams, women's teams, I think it was in Rio de Janeiro in the 1900s, before they banned football. Like, I didn't know that, and it was just amazing to read that there was this whole other world of women's football that was going on, and lovely to even think back to all those people enjoying sport such a long time ago. So to have that, like, how important is it to have these books and just to get that little bit of education?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and it is really important, because obviously, like, we play the women's game, we've always been involved in the women's game and hope to always be involved in the women's game, but there's so many stories in there where you've heard of the players, you've heard of what they've done, but you don't really know of the ins and out of what they've had to go through or what they've had to overcome to get to where they are. And I think that's the beauty of it. There's so many untold stories about some not only fantastic players but fantastic people. I think Nadia Nadim, she's a surgeon as well, not only a footballer. Like, all she's gone through, all that she's had to carry, her family fleeing the country, ending up in Denmark, not having the money to travel to a team where the team sponsored her and her sister then to be able to be part of the team. And her mum always said that, yes, you can play football, but school is the most important. So as long as it doesn't interfere with school, then you can do whatever you want. And she's playing at the highest level in the world, and she's a surgeon, which isn't an easy field to get involved in. So I think even like little stories like that, I think obviously when you're told you can't do something, you're going to prove someone wrong 10 times over. And I think that there's so much in not only that book, but other books around female sports stars and the female game across the world. And I think it is important for not only young girls and boys, but I suppose like women and men to kind of have a look and take a listen.
Well, there is inspiration everywhere in that book and on the Irish women's team as well. So thank you so much for joining me. I definitely recommend checking it out, Under the Lights and in the Dark, the Untold Stories of Women's Soccer.